The pigeons didn't care that she was trembling. They ate the breadcrumbs from her palm anyway, their heads jerking in that mechanical rhythm that meant nothing, no judgment, no recognition, no questions about who she used to be. Ashley Cooper sat on the weathered green bench at Riverview Park in Norfolk, her VA clinic scrubs faded to the color of old concrete, watching the birds scatter across the grass like she'd scattered across the country trying to become someone else. 12 years ago she'd been someone else. Someone with a different name, different rank, different hands that didn't shake when she heard a car backfire in the parking lot. Now she was just the quiet nurse from Oak Creek Memorial's VA clinic, the one nobody remembered 5 minutes after she clocked out. The park was her lunch break refuge because nobody here knew her past. Nobody asked questions about the surgical scars along her knuckles, thin white lines like someone had sewn her hands back together after an explosion, which someone had, though that someone had been her, working field surgery in a trauma tent while rounds came through the roof and the light turned the color of blood. Pain is information, she'd taught herself then. Now pain was just something that lived in her left hand, a tremor that came and went like an old friend who couldn't stay away. She'd walk away from combat medicine 3 years ago. Walked away from the unit, walked away from the career, walked away from the name that came with a service record classified so thoroughly that even her supervisor at Oak Creek Memorial didn't know why she'd transferred from San Diego to Norfolk requesting the quietest, lowest profile position available. The afternoon sun caught the fountain spray behind her, white noise drowning out the sounds that still came at night, the mechanical rhythm of a ventilator in a tent without walls, screams in a language that sounded like music when you were losing blood, the thud-thud-thud of incoming fire that meant your next surgery would be triage, and triage meant choosing who lived and who you'd hold while the light left their eyes. She absently touched the tremor in her left hand, pressing her palm flat against her thigh to make it stop. The breathing helped. Box breathing, for counts in, hold 4, out 4, hold 4. It was muscle memory. Everything was muscle memory now, even the civilian clothes felt like a costume she wore to hide. That was when the wheelchair rolled past. The man was older, maybe 60, with the kind of sunburned calm that comes from someone who'd stopped worrying about weather and just accepted it as another thing that happened while you existed in the world. He wore a faded jacket despite the humid Virginia heat, and when the wind caught the collar, Ashley saw it, the patch sewn inside the lining. Faded olive drab on dark fabric. She didn't need to see it clearly. She'd worn the same insignia on her own jacket once, the same unit designation from Ramadi in 2007. Special Forces. 160th SAW Support Element. Different branch, same war, same year, same city where the heat felt like it could melt your bones and the dust got into places dust had no business being. The man, a Marcus, she'd hear his name later, rolled his wheelchair to the spot near the accessible ramp where it met the park's main pathway. He pulled a bag of breadcrumbs from his jacket pocket with the careful precision of someone whose movements had to be deliberate, intentional, and he began tossing them to the ducks gathering at the shallow water's edge. His movements were gentle, measured. The kind of calm that comes from having already survived the worst and finding peace in feeding ducks on a Tuesday afternoon was better than any therapy Norfolk had to offer. Ashley watched him for maybe 90 seconds. 90 seconds of two people from the same war, the same year, the same impossible geography of trauma and survival, existing 10 feet apart in a public park while nobody around them had any idea. She was about to look away, to let him have his quiet moment without an audience, when she heard the voice. "Excuse me. Excuse me." Parks Director Gerald Hargrove was a man built like confidence wrapped in a city of Norfolk windbreaker, the kind of middle manager who'd never held real authority and so he wielded the small authority he possessed like it was a scepter forged from righteous power. He strode across the grass toward Marcus with a clipboard tucked under one arm and the kind of expression that suggested he'd been looking for a problem and had just found one. Hargrove was 48, divorced twice, and had been parks director for 6 years of budget meetings and pothole complaints and a lifetime of feeling like the world hadn't given him the respect he'd earned simply by existing. Now, as he approached Marcus Webb in his wheelchair, Hargrove felt that familiar heat rising in his chest, the heat that came when someone wasn't following the rules the way the rules demanded to be followed. "You're blocking the accessible ramp," Hargrove said. His voice carried across the green the way voices carry when someone wants to be heard. Two joggers paused. A mother on a nearby bench looked up from her phone. Hargrove's tone had that public quality, that specific acoustic punch that meant this was a performance. The wheelchair users need to access that ramp. You understand that, right? You can't just park here whenever you feel like it. Marcus continued tossing breadcrumbs. His movements didn't pause. His head didn't turn toward Hargrove. He was so calmly, completely ignoring the parks director that it was almost beautiful, the kind of deliberate non-response that comes from someone who'd learned long ago that some people's anger belonged to them and not to him. "I'm talking to you," Hargrove said, his volume climbing now. "This is loitering. You're creating a public disturbance. I'm going to have to ask you to move." The phones came out. Two women near the fountain started filming. An older gentleman with a corgi watched from a bench, his expression caught somewhere between entertainment and dread. This was the moment Hargrove lived for, Ashley realized, the moment when he held power over someone and could exercise it in front of witnesses. His voice had that particular edge, the specific tone of someone who knew he was being recorded and wanted the recording to prove he was right. "I said move. You're blocking the ramp. Are you deaf? I will have you removed from this park. I will call the police. You need to leave. Now." Marcus finally turned his head. His eyes met Hargrove's, and what Ashley saw in that single glance told her everything. This man had seen authority systems bigger and darker than any parks director from Norfolk, and he'd survived them. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't angry. He was tired in the way that people are tired when they've been fighting all day and all night and all of their lives, and sometimes they just wanted to feed ducks and be left alone. "I'm not blocking anything," Marcus said quietly. "The ramp is clear. I'm just sitting here." "You're loitering," Hargrove repeated, and his voice had taken on that righteous tone, the voice of someone who'd found his justification and was going to nail you to it. "You're causing a disturbance. He stopped, his eyes narrowing. "Are you a vagrant? Do you live in the park? Because this is a public facility, and we don't tolerate vagrancy. This isn't a camping ground." The smartphone cameras were definitely recording now. 3 phones visible. Hargrove's jaw clenched slightly. He knew he was being filmed and he'd decided that meant his behavior was justified. The logic of public performance. If someone's watching, you must be right. Ashley stood without deciding to stand. Her body moved first, the trained muscle response of someone whose job for 12 years had been recognizing when a situation was about to hurt someone and stepping between the hurt and the person. She walked the 10 feet from her bench to the scene with the kind of measured, purposeful calm that marked her as someone accustomed to crisis. "He's not blocking anything," Ashley said. Her voice was quiet. Controlled. The voice of someone who'd learned to make impact through absence of volume rather than volume's presence. "The ramp is completely accessible. He's simply sitting here, feeding the ducks. Which is permitted in Riverview Park." Hargrove turned toward her with the velocity of a man whose authority had just been questioned in front of witnesses. His face flushed a particular shade of red that Ashley recognized from years of working with people who'd been given tiny amounts of power and had convinced themselves it was everything. "This doesn't concern you," Hargrove said. "This is between me and him." "It concerns me when someone's being treated unfairly," Ashley replied. She didn't move closer. She didn't raise her voice. She simply existed in the space between them with the kind of calm that comes from having made worse decisions under worse circumstances. He has the legal right to be in this park. He's not loitering. He's not blocking anything. He's feeding ducks. Hargrove's clipboard came up like a shield. His face transformed, the flush spreading to his ears, his neck, the soft underside of his jaw where anger collected in men who weren't used to being contradicted. "You're enabling vagrancy," he said, and now his voice had taken on a different timbre, sharper, more dangerous in its precision. "You're interfering with a city official's duties. I'm getting your name and where you work, and I'm filing a formal complaint. You understand that? A formal complaint with your employer. I'm going to make sure they know you're here." harassing public servants, enabling people who don't belong in this park. The phones were still recording. At least for now. Ashley met his eyes with the kind of steadiness that comes from having looked across operating tables at surgeons who were trying to save lives and knowing in that moment that survival was measured in millimeters and seconds and decisions that couldn't be unmade. Marcus's eyes met hers for one measured second, and in that second, something passed between them. His hand moved slightly, just enough to shift the collar of his jacket, and Ashley saw it clearly now, the patch. Special Forces insignia. Ramadi unit designation. The same year. The same dust. The same war that lived in both their bodies now, in the tremor in her hands and the wheels of his chair and the way they both understood that some people's anger meant nothing because they'd seen what real anger looked like and real anger had cost everything. Ashley looked back at Hargrove with the kind of devastating calm that comes from having already decided what truth was worth saying. Some people wear their service on their sleeves, Mr. Hargrove, she said quietly. Others carry it in silence. One tear escaped from her left eye without her permission. She absorbed Hargrove's tirade, continuing now, rising in volume and ferocity, accusations about harassment and interference and legal consequences, with the kind of dignity that comes from having nothing left to lose because you've already lost everything that mattered. The phones kept recording. The crowd kept watching. And in the middle of the park, beneath the afternoon sun, two people who'd survived wars in deserts on opposite sides of the same unit stood in silent recognition while a small man with a clipboard tried to force his authority into a shape that would finally make him feel significant. 2 days later, the rain hadn't stopped. Ashley sat across from Dr. Richard Chen in his office at Oak Creek Memorial, watching his hands move across the desk like he was trying to find a script for what came next. The office smelled like old coffee and furniture, Polish, the kind of clean that hid discomfort. Chen slid a folder toward her. His jaw was tight. Gerald Thornton has been very busy, Chen said quietly. Very busy. Ashley didn't open the folder yet. She watched Chen's face instead, the exhaustion there, the calculation of a man trying to hold his ground on sinking sand. He's on the city council. Did you know that? Chen continued. He contacted the hospital board. 3 board members specifically. He's also reached out to your professional references, everyone. He demanded personnel files, copies of your hiring documents, incident reports from your entire tenure here. The rain drummed against the window like fingers on glass. What does the folder say? Ashley asked. Chen exhaled. Formal complaint of conduct unbecoming. The language is specific, Ashley. Aggressive behavior toward a public servant during off-duty hours. Harassment calculated to undermine city authority. Creating a hostile public scene reflective of institutional negligence. He paused. He's good at this. The complaint is structured. It has witnesses, people from the park who apparently corroborated that you were hostile. Ashley opened the folder. The letterhead was crisp, official. Thornton's signature sat at the bottom like a brand. The complaint detailed the park incident with surgical precision, her approach to Marcus Webb characterized as provocative, her response to Thornton framed as insubordinate confrontation with a city official acting in his official capacity. The photos attached showed her standing near Marcus, her posture misread as aggressive, her expression misconstrued as contempt. One photo showed her face as Thornton spoke, and she could see what he'd engineered into the narrative, a woman challenging authority. A nurse overstepping. A problem. The board wants immediate administrative leave, Chen said. Pending formal review. A week from tomorrow, there's a hearing. They'll ask you to explain the incident, provide your account, answer questions about your judgment. And if I don't explain it satisfactorily? Chen looked at his hands. Then your nursing license is in jeopardy. Potentially permanent termination. Ashley closed the folder. The cardboard was thin, fragile. Everything official looked so easy to break. I need you to understand something, Chen said. His voice had changed, softer, almost paternal. This is institutional power at work. Thornton knows people. The city manager answered his call. 3 of our board members have business relationships with the Parks Department. One of them owes Thornton money from a real estate deal. This isn't personal justice. This is a network protecting itself. Ashley stood. Thank you for telling me. That's it? You're not going to. What would you suggest, Dr. Chen? Fight it? With what? He has the network. I have a cracked coffee mug and a succulent I've been killing for 3 years. Chen flinched at something in her tone, not anger, but precision. The way she stated facts. The VA clinic felt different when she walked through the doors that afternoon. The hallways were the same, the fluorescent lights still humming their electric drone, but something had shifted in the air pressure. Conversations died when she entered the break room. A resident she'd trained for 6 months suddenly became very interested in the vending machine. 2 nurses she'd worked night shifts with for 2 years couldn't quite make eye contact. On the unit board outside the main office, someone had posted a notice, Nurse Cooper, administrative leave effective immediately, conduct under review. Her locker was in the back near the supply closet. She'd filled it gradually over 2 years with the small things that made 12-hour shifts bearable. The cracked coffee mug from the Naval Medical Corps School in San Antonio, she'd dropped it during her first week of classes and the crack split the mug in half, but she'd glued it back together because waste was a luxury her childhood didn't afford. The dying succulent sat in a clay pot someone had given her as a housewarming gift when she'd moved to Norfolk. She could never keep plants alive, something about her hands that seemed to drain the life out of growing things, but she kept trying anyway. And the photograph, small, worn at the edges, showing 5 people in medical scrubs standing in front of a Humvee in Ramadi. The one on the left was Torres. His last name was emblazoned on his nameplate, Torres J. He died at 03 for 7 hours on March 14, 2009, with Ashley's hands on his chest trying to keep his lungs inflated while his blood painted her fingers. She'd been unable to save him. A patient's family member, Mrs. Reeves, whose daughter Ashley had helped manage through a PTSD episode last month, saw her emptying the locker. "Wait," Mrs. Reeves said loudly in the hallway. "Is that you? The nurse who harassed the city official? I saw the video on Facebook. Are you suspended?" Ashley placed the coffee mug carefully in the cardboard box, nestled it with the succulent and the photograph. "Yes." "Well, you shouldn't have done that. Regardless of what you think, you don't just talk to city officials like that." Ashley closed the locker. The sound was final, the kind of definitive click that meant something was ending. Evening fell hard and fast in Norfolk in autumn. The rain came sideways, driven by a wind that seemed to have momentum behind it. Ashley stood at the bus stop on Harbor Street, the cardboard box tucked under her left arm, watching headlights blur through the water streaming down the shelter's plastic window. Her scrubs were soaked. She'd walked instead of driving, letting the rain settle on her shoulders, letting the cold find its way into the spaces between her ribs. The box felt heavier than it should have. The coffee mug inside had cost nothing. The succulent had been a gift with no value. The photograph was irreplaceable, which meant it was priceless, which meant it was the most dangerous thing she owned. 1 week. The formal board review was in 1 week. 7 days to construct a narrative that made sense of her actions, to apologize for standing in a public park and defending a man with a wheelchair. 7 days to convince a hospital board that she wasn't the woman in the video everyone was watching, sharing, commenting on with the casual cruelty of people who'd never had to make a decision under fire. The bus arrived, diesel exhaust mixing with rain. She climbed aboard and found a seat in the back, the cardboard box balanced on her lap like something that might break if she wasn't careful. Through the rear window, she watched Norfolk receding, the clinic, the parks, the bureaucratic architecture of the city that had decided her value and found it insufficient. By the time she reached her apartment, the rain had washed the makeup from her face. She sat on the kitchen floor with the cardboard box between her knees and pulled out the photograph. Torres stared at the camera with that expression all young soldiers had, a mixture of confidence and terror held in perfect equilibrium. He'd been 23 years old. The tremor in her left hand had gotten worse. It started as a microvibration 3 years ago and had been growing incrementally ever since. She placed the photograph on the floor and pressed her palm flat, watching her fingers shake slightly. Muscle memory, she called it. The body remembering things the mind had been trained to forget. The hearing was scheduled for 1,400 hours on a Tuesday. 7 days away. 168 hours. 10,080 minutes to figure out how to apologize for who she was. But that wasn't the worst part. The rain had stopped by the time Ashley walked back to Riverview Park. Her cardboard box sat on the passenger seat of her old Civic, the coffee mug, the succulent, the photograph of Torres wrapped in paper towels. She wasn't planning to return. Returning meant facing what she'd done. But somewhere between the parking garage at Oak Creek Memorial and the empty apartment that would soon evict her for missed rent, the decision made itself. Marcus didn't deserve the fallout from her intervention. He didn't deserve to be a case file in a Parks Department complaint. He didn't deserve to have his quiet afternoon feeding ducks weaponized against him by a man who'd never served a day in his life. The fountain was throwing its last light of the afternoon, catching the bronze surface like liquid fire. Marcus sat where she'd first seen him, wheelchair positioned at the perfect angle to watch the ducks gather for the evening feeding. He heard her footsteps before he saw her. His head turned, and something in his expression shifted. Not surprise. Recognition. "You didn't have to come back," Marcus said quietly. "But I'm glad you did." They talked for 20 minutes about nothing important. The weather. The ducks. The way Norfolk changes at sunset, how the brick facades along Water Street catch fire before the light dies completely. Marcus mentioned he'd been feeling off lately, chest tight, breathing shallow, but it's probably nothing, you know? Getting older, gaining weight sitting all day. The usual stuff. Ashley heard the tightness in his voice that had nothing to do with physical symptoms. She heard the apology disguised as small talk, as if he'd somehow been responsible for Thornton's cruelty, for the bureaucratic machinery that now spun around him both because of and despite her intervention. "It wasn't your fault," Ashley said. The first time she'd spoken beyond pleasantries. "What happened? What Thornton did?" "Wasn't yours either," Marcus replied. But his breathing pattern had shifted. Shallow. Rapid. Almost panicked, though his face remained calm. She'd seen that before, soldiers who compartmentalized so well they didn't notice their own bodies failing until the failure became catastrophic. As she was about to suggest he see someone, a doctor, anyone, Marcus's face went pale. Not pale. Drained. His hand moved to his chest as if he could physically push back against what was happening inside. The gasp came next, wet, desperate, the sound of a man whose lungs had betrayed him. His jaw clenched. His eyes widened. Ashley moved. Not decided to move. Moved. Her body recognized the signature before her brain caught up. Unilateral chest rise. Tracheal deviation. Distended neck veins. Tension pneumothorax. Air trapped in the pleural space, collapsing the right lung, compressing the heart, building pressure with every breath. She dropped to her knees beside the wheelchair, her hands already assessing, already knowing. The surgical touch was muscle memory forged in a place most people would never survive, let alone thrive. Ramadi. 2009, summer. 327 days of combat medicine under direct fire, of hands moving through chaos with the terrible certainty of someone who'd already seen the worst and survived it anyway. "Marcus, I need you to trust me. This is going to hurt, but you'll die without it." A jogger had stopped nearby. A woman in neon yellow running gear, phone already out, voice calling for an ambulance, giving the location, giving the cross streets. The woman's hand shook. Ashley's did not. She reached into Marcus's jacket, the same worn olive-drab canvas where that faded Special Forces unit patch lived sewn into the lining, and found a ballpoint pen. Blue. Plastic. Worthless in any other context. She had her hospital ID badge. She'd kept it even after being placed on leave, had carried it like a talisman, like evidence that the woman she'd been was real. Now it became a one-way valve, tape torn from a nearby park bench, improvised and precise. The surgical touch was unmistakable to anyone who'd spent time in the field. Not tentative. Not careful. Confident, with the kind of confidence that only came from knowing exactly what happened when you failed. She positioned his arm. Exposed the second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line. Found the anatomy with her fingertips. This was how they taught it in SEAL training, how they drilled it in the desert, how you performed it when there was no equipment, no supplies, no mercy from circumstance. Just pressure building in a chest cavity and a human body that couldn't sustain it. The needle went in. She could feel the air hiss out, the distinctive sound that meant everything had just inverted from fatal to fixable. The one-way valve held. The pressure released. Marcus's breathing, which had been that terrible shallow panic gasp, began to normalize. His eyes stayed open, but the wild animal fear in them softened into something more like shock. Like recognition. "You're breathing stabilizing," Ashley said. Her voice had dropped into the register she used to use, the one that came from somewhere deeper than her civilian nursing training. The one that didn't ask questions or negotiate. "The ambulance is 3 minutes out. You're going to be okay." Marcus's lips were still tinged blue, but they weren't darkening anymore. His chest was rising and falling again in a rhythm that sustained consciousness. His eyes found hers and held them with an intensity that felt like drowning. "I knew that surgical touch," Marcus whispered through the blue-tinged lips, through the oxygen debt his body was still repaying. "Only combat medics move like that. You were in Ramadi, weren't you? You were one of us." Ashley's hands froze. Not visibly. Not so the jogger would notice. Not so the sirens wailing closer would catch it. But internally, inside the architecture of her own carefully maintained facade, something locked into place. The lie was over. Not revealed. Not yet. But over. There was no way to perform needle decompression on a fellow Ramadi veteran without him knowing exactly what he was looking at. The surgical precision. The absence of hesitation. The muscle memory that moved faster than thought. "Stay with me," Ashley said instead of answering. "Ambulance is coming. You're breathing. You're going to make it." The first responders came from 2 directions at once, the sound of sirens cutting through the park's evening calm, boots on asphalt, equipment bags clattering. A paramedic in a dark blue uniform took in the scene instantly, wheelchair-bound patient, woman on her knees, improvised needle decompression with a pen and a badge, vital stabilizing. He looked at Ashley and something shifted in his assessment. He saw her hands. He saw the way she was monitoring Marcus's breathing pattern without being asked. He saw the competence. "What's your medical background?" he asked while his partner unloaded the stretcher. "Nursing," Ashley said. Which was true, in the way that saying a submarine is a boat was technically accurate. "You did the decompression." "Tension pneumo." Air hiss confirmed. "Vitals improving." The paramedic nodded. No more questions. He'd worked with combat medics before. He recognized the syntax. Marcus was loaded onto the stretcher with careful efficiency, the makeshift valve secured, an oxygen mask fitted over his face. Before they moved him, Marcus's eyes found Ashley again across the space that was opening between them, the paramedic, the equipment, the machinery of professional emergency response. "Ramadi," Marcus said through the oxygen mask. Not a question. A statement. A recognition. 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines. "You were with us." Ashley didn't answer. She stood, her hands falling to her sides, watching them move him toward the ambulance. The rain was starting again, light mist that caught the streetlights, turning the park into something watercolor and unreal. Around them, the early evening crowd was gathering, people with phones, with questions, with the morbid curiosity of witnesses who'd just watched someone be pulled back from the edge. The ambulance doors closed on Marcus's face. His eyes, conscious and clear, still meeting hers through the window. Still knowing. The sirens rebuilt themselves into sound and motion and then were gone, leaving Ashley standing in the cooling rain with a pen in her hand and her hospital ID badge torn into pieces on the pavement beside an empty wheelchair. She'd come to apologize for her intervention. Instead, she'd just handed Marcus the truth she'd spent 3 years burying. The morning came with the weight of finality. Gerald Hargrove stood at the podium outside Riverview Park's administrative building, the same building where he'd spent 17 years consolidating power, where every city council member knew his name, where the cameras always pointed in his direction when he wanted them to. This morning, they pointed at him again. City manager beside him. 3 news crews. Photographers spreading across the manicured grass like journalists at a scandal, which is exactly what he intended this to be. What we're addressing today, Hargrove said, his voice carrying the practiced confidence of a man who'd never faced real consequence, is the erosion of public standards. The enablement of dangerous behavior by those in authority. He gestured to a printed policy document, fresh from the printer that morning. New accountability measures for city employees and healthcare workers who abuse their positions of trust. We will not tolerate lawlessness disguised as compassion. The cameras clicked. Local news anchors scribbled notes. Hargrove had spent the previous evening crafting this narrative with precision, not emotional escalation, but strategic positioning. He'd learned that much from his 23 years in municipal government. You don't scream at cameras. You smile. You sound reasonable. You make your opponent sound unstable by comparison. An off-duty nurse from Oak Creek Memorial intervened in a legitimate city matter 2 days ago, Hargrove continued, his tone suggesting regret rather than anger. Publicly contradicted a city official. Yesterday, that same individual performed unauthorized medical procedures in this park without proper credentials, without supervision, without any regard for liability or protocol. He paused, letting that sink in. We're talking about someone practicing medicine without a license in a public space. That's not heroism, ladies and gentlemen. That's recklessness. The city manager nodded, orchestrated support. Ashley stood at the edge of the crowd in the grey November morning, her civilian clothes, black slacks and a navy cardigan, making her nearly invisible among the journalists and onlookers. She'd come because staying away would look like guilt. She'd come because Marcus deserved to know she wasn't running. She'd come because some part of her, the part that had learned to stand in the face of actual fire, refused to hide anymore. But that wasn't the worst part. Hargrove's phone had rung that morning at 6:24 a.m. He'd answered it in his kitchen while his coffee cooled untouched on the granite counter. The voice on the other end had been polite. Federal. The Department of Defense had become interested in the situation. There were questions about whether a decorated service member's medical credentials were being properly contextualized. There were suggestions that he might want to reconsider his public position before things became complicated. Hargrove had laughed. Politely declined. Explained that he was simply protecting the public. He'd hung up that phone convinced he'd handled it correctly, shown strength, refused intimidation, maintained his ground. He didn't understand that the call wasn't a warning. It was a courtesy. At 8:43 a.m., exactly 14 minutes into his press conference, the sound changed everything. The rotor wash came first, a deep, rhythmic percussion that made journalists look up from their notebooks. The sky darkened not with clouds but with the massive shadow of a UH-60M Black Hawk helicopter descending toward the park's open field, rotors carving the November air like a knife through silk. The wind it generated scattered papers across the podium. One camera operator had to grip his tripod to keep it from tipping. The helicopter touched down on the grass. Rotors still turning. The door slid open. 3 hums followed, their tires tearing fresh tracks across the park's manicured lawn, moving with the kind of coordinated precision that comes from units that have trained together for decades. The vehicle stopped in a triangle formation around the podium area. Boots hit the ground in synchronized rhythm, not the heavy thuds of ordinary soldiers, but the light, controlled steps of men who've spent careers moving through hostile territory. The first figure out was a Navy SEAL commander in full dress uniform, dress blues with the gold insignia catching the morning light. Behind him came a Marine colonel, face weathered like granite. Then a bearded Special Forces operator in civilian clothes, the kind of casual wear that somehow communicated more authority than any uniform could. Hargrove's face went pale. Not angry pale. Not flushed with indignation. White. The kind of white that comes when a man suddenly understands he's made a catastrophic miscalculation. The SEAL commander walked directly past Hargrove, completely ignored him, as if the parks director had become furniture, and approached Ashley. The crowd parted without being asked. Cameras swung to follow. Everyone sensed the shift in the air, that invisible moment when power changes hands. Senior Chief Petty Officer Ashley Cooper, the commander, said, his voice steady as a rifle shot, loud enough for every camera to capture, "Your presence is requested for a Department of Defense briefing regarding your medical intervention yesterday. Your operational identity has been compromised." Ashley's expression didn't change. That was the thing about combat training, it teaches you to control what people see. Her hand trembled slightly as she raised it, not from fear, but from the kind of anticipatory tremor that comes when you've been holding your breath for 3 years and someone finally tells you the truth. The city manager stepped back from the podium. Journalists shouted questions, cameras clicked in rapid-fire succession. The Marine colonel moved forward, holding a classified file folder. His hands, when he opened it, were actually trembling, the kind of shake that comes from respect, from knowing whose service record he was about to speak aloud in public. Senior Chief Petty Officer Ashley Cooper, he read, his voice formal and ceremonial, served as lead combat medic, Naval Special Warfare Unit, 2005 through 2012. Embedded with SEAL Team 7 and Army Special Forces ODA R-574 during Operation Phantom Fury. 7 tours. That's what the file said. Ashley had done 7 rotations into the worst place on Earth. The bearded operator stepped forward next, Marcus's hospital roommate, the man who'd sat beside Marcus's bed in Norfolk General and listened to the story of the surgical hands that had saved his life, the hands that belonged to someone who'd spent years learning medicine in Ramadi's blood-soaked streets. "I served with Senior Chief Cooper in 2008, he said. I watched her perform emergency procedures in conditions that would make most medics freeze. She didn't freeze. She saved my team." Hargrove tried to speak. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. The SEAL commander's voice cut across the park like a blade. He addressed the cameras, the journalists, the assembled crowd, everyone except Hargrove, who'd ceased to exist in the commander's consideration. "This woman holds the Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism under fire, 2 Bronze Stars with Valor, and the Purple Heart. She saved 47 lives in Ramadi. 47. Under direct enemy fire. With nothing but medical training and the kind of calm that only comes from having already survived things you shouldn't have survived." The commander paused, and the silence was so complete you could hear the helicopter rotors in the distance. "She is not subject to civilian harassment by petty bureaucrats. That ends now." The city manager appeared at Hargrove's elbow. Whispered something. Hargrove shook his head, denying whatever was being suggested. The city manager's face hardened. He moved to the podium microphone. "Gerald Hargrove is terminated, effective immediately, for conduct unbecoming a city official and creating a significant public relations liability for the city of Norfolk." The city manager's voice was steady, scripted. This had been prepared in advance, waiting only for the confirmation of Ashley's identity. "His position is terminated. Security will escort him from city property." Hargrove turned to leave, and that's when Marcus Webb rolled forward in his wheelchair, oxygen cannula under his nose, flanked by 2 other veterans in civilian clothes. His voice was quiet, but every camera caught it. "Senior Chief Cooper spent 3 years hiding in Norfolk," Marcus said. "Watching people. Helping people. Asking nothing in return because she'd already sacrificed everything. Yesterday she saved my life with nothing but a pen and medical knowledge that came from a place most of us can't even imagine." Marcus looked directly at Hargrove, his eyes carrying the weight of someone who'd also seen what war does. "And you tried to destroy her for it." The cameras turned back to Ashley. The SEAL commander stood beside her, and for just a moment, just long enough for the cameras to catch it, she allowed her composure to slip by the smallest fraction. One tear. Not from sadness. From the kind of relief that comes when you've been holding everything together alone for so long that someone finally saw you and chose to carry some of the weight. She raised her head. Met the eyes of every camera. Senior Chief Petty Officer Ashley Cooper, who'd spent 3 years being invisible, had become impossible to ignore. The next morning, the sun rose over Riverview Park with the kind of brilliant clarity that makes you squint. Gerald Hargrove stood at the park's administrative building steps, a podium before him and 6 microphones clustered like hungry birds. He was smiling, confident, rehearsed, already composing the narrative about new conduct standards and the troublemakers who'd disrupted city operations. His voice carried across the green that particular tone of bureaucratic authority that sounds like someone reading from a script written by his own ego. Behind him, the fountain sparkled. Innocent. Beautiful. Everything he'd tried to control. He was mid-sentence about maintaining order through clear policy enforcement when the sound came. Not sirens. Something deeper. The grinding mechanical roar of a diesel engine, the kind that doesn't announce itself, it just appears and changes the air pressure in a 3-block radius. 3 Humvees turned the corner from Riverside Drive simultaneously, olive green with military markings, their suspension barely bending under the weight they carried. Behind them, a black SUV with government plates. Not threatening in a chaotic way, threatening in the way that things are threatening when they move with absolute precision. No rushing. No urgency in the speed. Just inevitability. Hargrove stopped mid-word. His smile froze like a corpse's. The news crews pivoted, cameras swinging away from the podium toward the vehicles now rolling directly onto the park's grass, the kind of move that said these people didn't care about grass or parking lines or jurisdiction. The Humvees formed a rough perimeter. 4 Navy SEALs emerged from each vehicle, dressed in Navy working uniform Type 1, camouflage digital patterns, boots that looked like they'd been polished with a laser. But it was the 5th figure that made Hargrove's face drain of color. The man who emerged from the black SUV wore the same uniform, but his shoulders carried the weight of command the way some people carry oxygen. Lieutenant Commander, Navy SEAL insignia gleaming on his chest. His face was the color of weathered oak, eyes that had seen things most people spend their entire lives successfully avoiding. He walked directly toward Ashley, who stood at the edge of the crowd in civilian clothes, jeans, a gray jacket, the same cardboard box still tucked under one arm like some kind of talisman. He didn't stop until he was 2 feet from her face, and when he spoke, his voice had the kind of authority that made the news crews forget to film for a moment, remembered, then filmed harder. Senior Chief Petty Officer Cooper. Not a question. A designation. A classification. The words hung in the salt-touched air like a flag unfurling. Your identity has been compromised, he continued, his eyes never leaving hers. You are hereby requested to report to Naval Special Warfare Command for an immediate briefing regarding your medical intervention and operational status. It is not a request. Ashley's hands didn't shake. Her voice, when it came, was steady, and 2 octaves lower than anyone in the park had ever heard from the quiet VA nurse. Yes, sir. Understood. The SEAL commander turned to face the assembled crowd and cameras, and when he spoke again, his voice carried across the park with the precision of someone accustomed to being obeyed across impossible distances. I am Lieutenant Commander James Mitchell, Naval Special Warfare Command. This woman standing before you is not a nurse who stepped out of line. This woman is Senior Chief Petty Officer Ashley Nicole Cooper, United States Navy. Combat medic. 3 deployments. Ramadi, Fallujah, and Sanjin Valley. She has been decorated for Valor in direct fire environments. The cameras panned to Ashley. She stood motionless, her cardboard box suddenly looking like an artifact from a previous life. Senior Chief Cooper holds the Navy Cross, Mitchell continued, his voice like a tank idling in a garage, quiet but carrying the knowledge that it could flatten anything. 2 Bronze Stars with Valor. She was awarded the Joint Service Medal for extraordinary heroism. Most importantly, and I want every camera here recording this, she saved 47 lives under direct fire in Ramadi. 47. As a medic with a 9mm pistol and battlefield supplies that would fit in a backpack. A reporter shouted a question. Mitchell's hand came up, not aggressively, just a small gesture that meant silence, and the silence came. It was absolute. This woman is not subject to civilian harassment by petty bureaucrats, Mitchell said, and the word petty made Hargrove flinch like he'd been physically struck. She is not subject to administrative leave for defending another veteran. She is not subject to a city parks director's vendetta. She will be appropriately commended, appropriately reinstated, and appropriately protected by the full authority of the Department of Defense. The city manager appeared then, actually jogging from the administrative building, phone still in his hand, his face the color of raw dough. He was out of breath, eyes wide, and he headed directly for the podium. Hargrove tried to intercept him, reaching for his arm, but the city manager brushed past him like he was furniture. Gerald Hargrove, the city manager announced, loud enough for every camera, every phone, every reporter's notebook to capture it. You are terminated effective immediately. Cause, creating a public relations catastrophe, deliberately harassing a decorated war hero, and bringing disrepute to this city and its parks department. Hargrove's voice came out raw. You can't, I have connections. Board members. City council. Your connections, the city manager cut him off, just learned you tried to destroy a Navy Cross recipient. Half of them called me in the last hour demanding your removal. The Board of Supervisors is already drafting a statement. You're done here. A woman in a blazer emerged from a silver sedan, Ashley's former supervisor from Oak Creek Memorial, moving with the urgency of someone who'd just received a phone call that would determine whether she still had a career. She made a beeline for Ashley, her face caught between panic and something that looked like genuine relief. Senior Chief Cooper, the supervisor said, and the formal address hung between them like an apology and a prayer combined. Your administrative leave is rescinded immediately. The hospital board extends its deepest apologies and would like to discuss a commendation for your actions. Ashley nodded once, her face composed but her eyes betraying something, the moment when the weight you've been carrying suddenly gets put down and you realize how much it was actually crushing you. Hargrove tried one more time. His voice came out pleading, desperate, the sound of a man watching his entire constructed reality collapse in real time before news cameras and God and the United States military. This is a witch hunt. I was doing my job. She broke protocol. She endangered. The SEAL commander turned to him. Just turned. Didn't walk toward him, didn't raise his voice. Just turned, and whatever was in his face made Hargrove stop mid-sentence like he'd run into a wall. You attempted to destroy a decorated veteran for defending another veteran, Mitchell said quietly. Your job is forfeit. Your reputation is forfeit. You are dismissed. The news crews swarmed Hargrove as he retreated toward his car, cameras and microphones following him like sharks, questions pouring over him. Did you know about her service? How do you respond to the Navy's statement? What do you say to accusations of targeting veterans? He didn't answer, just fumbled with his car door, climbed inside, and drove away with the kind of reckless speed that comes from someone who knows their life has just changed format entirely. Within hours, the video was everywhere. #Navy Cross Nurse trended on Twitter nationally within 4 minutes. Network news picked it up by evening. Cable news ran it on a loop, dramatic music added, the moment the commander said her rank played over and over in different angles, different slow-motion captures. Hargrove's LinkedIn profile was flooded with comments within hours, former colleagues, people he'd networked with for decades, suddenly writing publicly that they'd never really supported his positions anyway, that they'd always thought his management style was questionable. 3 city council members who'd backed him issued statements distancing themselves before the news cycle completed its first rotation. By that evening, Hargrove sat in his darkened home office, the news playing silently on a television he could have turned off but didn't. His phone vibrated constantly, not with calls, with notifications. People removing him from group chats. Emails about professional distance. Texts that boiled down to, I can't be associated with you anymore. The man who'd held institutional power through connection, through networking, through the careful cultivation of political relationships, watched all of those relationships evaporate the moment they became liabilities rather than assets. 6 months later, Riverview Park hosted a rededication ceremony. The fountain had been redesigned, larger, more prominent, funded by donations that poured in from across the country after the video went viral, from veterans organizations and military families and random people who just decided that what happened mattered. Ashley stood at the podium wearing her Navy dress uniform for the first time since leaving active duty, the blues, the jacket perfectly tailored, the medals ribboned across her chest in ascending order of prestige. The Navy Cross hung above everything else, the highest recognition, and next to her stood Marcus Webb in his army jacket, the matching unit patches now visible, sewn with precision by someone who understood that symbols matter because stories matter. Ashley's hands were steady as she reached the microphone. The tremor that might have existed in another life, in another version of this woman, had been replaced by something harder. Not unkindness. Clarity. We wear many uniforms in life, she began, and her voice carried across the park with the same authority that Mitchell had demonstrated, the kind of voice that comes from having commanded people in situations where commands determine whether everyone goes home. Some with rank. Some with scrubs. Some with scars that nobody sees. But true class is what you do when the lights go out, when no one's watching, when helping someone costs you everything. The crowd, 200 strong, mostly veterans, families, people from the VA clinic, from Oak Creek Memorial where she'd been reinstated and promoted to Director of Combat Veteran Services, stood in applause. Marcus wheeled forward and showed Ashley the new patch he'd had sewn into his jacket, the matching insignia, Ramadi, the two of them finally standing together in uniform, their service visible at last. Behind them, the fountain caught the morning light. Water flowed over the engraved names of 47 service members, the ones Ashley had saved, the ones she'd carried through battlefields and trauma bays and the years of silence after. Torres was there. The medic she couldn't save. His name wasn't forgotten anymore. A local news crew doing a follow-up story for the 6-month mark captured one final image for their evening broadcast, Gerald Hargrove in the parking lot of Norfolk Community College, wearing a community college staff lanyard, a CPR certification card clipped to his pocket, his uniform now polo shirt and khaki pants. A reporter approached him with a microphone, asking for comment on the ceremony, on the women whose lives he'd tried to destroy. Hargrove shook his head, shoulders slumped, and walked away without speaking. The camera followed him until he disappeared inside the building, anonymous now, irrelevant, just another person teaching basic life support to kids who would forget his name by next semester. If you've watched this far, you understand what this story is actually about. It's not about vindication. It's about the people standing invisibly in every room, carrying weight that nobody calculates. Subscribe to witness more stories like this one, real people, hidden strength, the moment the world finds out what it never knew. Leave a comment telling us, would you have had the courage to do what Ashley did, knowing it would cost you everything? And if you did, would you have been able to forgive the system that nearly destroyed you? We want to hear from you.